Welcome back into another episode of Press Coverage. I'm Andy Anders, joined by Chase Brown. On this day, Ohio State landing its fourth transfer portal commitment for basketball this cycle in Josh Ojianwuna. Take note of that pronunciation out there, listeners. Ojianwuna. He's going to be playing a significant role for the Buckeyes this year. Is coming off of an injury, but it seems like that will be healed up. He'll be ready to go by season start is the hope. Chase, just initial reactions, thoughts on this big man addition for Ohio State.
Yeah, I think it's a great ad for Ohio State. I think the departures of Aaron Bradshaw and Sean Stewart left something to be desired in terms of guys that were consistently contributing both as starters and off the bench. You also lost Austin Parks. So to have another guy come in with size and with some proven ability to both score and rebound the ball, I think is something that people in Columbus and Ohio State fans across the country are going to welcome.
Yeah, 6'10", 230. I think Ohio State is missing. And when you look at him, he's got a lot of muscle, right? He's got a lot of good, lean muscle to handle the physicality of those Big Ten forwards, which I think was a major, major issue for Ohio State last year, especially when Sean Stewart was in foul trouble, which unfortunately was often the case. They just struggled to deal with some of the bigger, more physical interior forwards of the Big Ten. Didn't have that bona fide rim protector. Aaron Bradshaw certainly didn't fill that role as well as was hoped. But Sean Stewart gave you some of that. He was just in foul trouble a lot of the time. And then other pieces. You talk about three centers leaving the program. It was clear that Ohio State needed to add back one more body at the position, although Amari Bynum is also coming in as a freshman and can play some of that role. You have Ivan Yagovan coming back, but clear from last year, he wasn't really ready for that. So this gives you, yes, like you said, a more proven presence. Last year was Ojianwuna's first year as a starter for Baylor, but 23 games before a season-ending injury, had 7.4 points and 6.4 rebounds per game, pardon me. But I think more than that, it's about efficiency, right? Whenever I evaluate basketball and in general sense, a lot of it is about efficiency. I think Ohio State was missing efficiency in a lot of areas, particularly in rebounding last year. And Josh, last year at Baylor, per 40 minutes, 10.4 rebounds, which is a really good number. Would have been third on Ohio State's roster last year, and one of those, number two, was Ivan Yagovan, who really didn't have a good sample size to even establish what his efficiency looks like long-term as a rebounder. Only played 119 minutes total on the season, so when you're talking about per 40-minute stat, that's only 3 segments worth of data there. But Josh Ojianwuna also, I think the number one thing that stands out about his offensive game is efficiency. Shot 77.4% from the field last year, Chase. It's a pretty ridiculous number. Only took 3.7 shots per game, which he wasn't a heavy factor in Baylor's offense as much, but picked his opportunities and took them well. I think there's a lot to be said for that when you had a team that had a lot of inefficient play from certain offensive positions last year. So when Josh takes them, he makes them count. And I think that's going to be something that's helpful to the offense, but also just that big physical body in there to get rebounds, to play defense on the inside, and certainly add some depth back to the front court that has lost 3 players at center in Bradshaw, Stewart, as you said, and then Austin Parks.
Right, and I think when you look at his highlight package, no matter where you view it from, there is going to be lots of them that involve BJ Edgecombe getting to the rack and lobbing it up for a dunk. And I think that's why a lot of his efficient shots, or a lot of his efficiency, comes from that 3 to 4 foot distance around the rim. You would like to think that most players at this level are going to make those shots, but how many times, Andy, did we watch last season where Bradshaw and Stewart got to that point around the rim and couldn't finish those baskets off? I do think Ohio State's looking for somebody who can be physical around the rim, who can finish it once somebody like Bruce Thornton gets to the rack, can dish it off. and they can get 2 points and go back down the floor. And Andy, I think also too, this move, as I'm thinking about it, considering what could its impact be for the program, I think this does position Ohio State well, as we mentioned with the addition of Christoph Tilley, to match up as well as possible with Purdue. Purdue's bringing back not only Braden Smith at the point guard spot, but they're also bringing back Trey Kaufman-Renn. And then they added Oscar Clough from, I believe it was South Dakota State, their center transfer. And so now that's a pretty solid top three, pretty solid big three for Purdue to be operating out of. Both Trey Kaufman-Renn and Oscar Clough have that size that you need to be able to match up with. So is it possible, Andy, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. What is the idea maybe behind having a guy like Ojianwuna and Christoph Tilley on the floor at the same time?
Yeah, it goes to defense and rebounding, right? There are Big Ten teams that have so much size. It's the Big Ten just always has a great lineage of forwards, and it's not just Purdue. It's Michigan last year when you talk about having Vladislav Golden and Danny Wolf on the floor together. Maryland's had a great line of really big physical interior presences. Illinois had some of that in recent years. Like, it's just something you have to deal with in a major way in the Big Ten. And when you're embracing the grind of a conference season, the wear and tear that it's been so clear a Big Ten schedule puts on a team, put on Ohio State last year, you need depth in the front court positions. And so that's the main idea of getting Tilley. And that's not going to be the primary way they deploy both of them, I don't think. Christoph Tilley and Josh Ojianwuna, but talking to sources within the program, it is very clear they intend to put them on the floor together in certain scenarios, right? And I think it's both of them are more center type athletes. Ojianwuna certainly has some power forward, some abilities to play the four in his game, and that's what he would play when he and Tilley are on the floor together. Tilley being a 7-footer who has also a very efficient interior scorer, but in a higher volume than Ojianwuna. There at Santa Clara, he was much more involved in a prevalent force in their offense. But Ohio State in general, I think that, again, you mentioned it's a great point. Just the lack of efficiency around the rim from Aaron Bradshaw and Sean Stewart last year, not to keep picking at those guys, but though that is something that this duo can add at the center position for Ohio State. And I do expect, assuming he comes back well from his injury, Ojianwuna to be that number 2 guy at the center position moving into next year. I think that was the plan for Sean Stewart before he left the last day the portal was open. But also just general front court depth when you talk about now. Devin Royal obviously coming back as a star, but you added Brandon Noel, who had insanely efficient scoring, and I think there's a lot of things to like in his game coming in from Wright State there at the power forward position. You have a lot of bodies in that front court now, and throw Amari Bynum in that mix too. Coming in as a freshman, I really think there's a lot to like about his skill set, and basketball players can always make a quick impact year one. We saw it this past year with John Mobley Jr. Colin White even got some minutes, though we'll see exactly. Ohio State definitely still wants to add a wing in the portal to replace Micah Parrish, but this overall for the depth of the team, for embracing the grind of those Big Ten forwards, you have a lot more proven with this than last portal cycle when you took Stewart and Bradshaw. And I think even looking back in hindsight, the benefit of it and how it didn't pan out with those 2 guys, it was still a good move, a good idea in theory to take 2 former 5-star guys who were playing for Blue Bloods and transferring out. But there was no proof in the pudding really with either of them in terms of extended starting time, consistent production that you expect out of 5-star incredible athletes like both of them are. Maybe a little more with Bradshaw because he did start some games at Kentucky, but certainly not putting up the production that Ojianwuna had as an interior defender and rebounder this past year with Baylor. So that to me this is a really quality addition to build the depth of the front court and establish a better rebounding and interior defensive presence that was so direly missing from Ohio State when especially when Sean Stewart was in foul trouble, which again was often, unfortunately. Guy fouled out of 7 games and averaged 3.5 fouls a game. I mean, when he was off the court, it was so noticeable the lack of interior defense and rebounding presence Ohio State had. Devin Royal gave them back some of that, at least in the rebounding aspect, but they needed. You can tell that Jake Diebler has identified this as a big issue within the team and is going out and addressing it. Now it's about that one last portal addition. They need a way.
Right. And the reason I brought up Purdue earlier was because I saw this statistic from Bart Torvik, who does lots of the advanced data on the college basketball side, where he has said and he has reported that Purdue has the largest amount of projected returning starting minutes in college basketball next season at 69.7%. There is a few schools in between them and Ohio State, but Ohio State's actually pretty high up there. It's Purdue, it's Arkansas, Marquette, Stanford, Notre Dame, SMU, BYU, and Ohio State comes in at 49.8%. And that makes sense, right? You have guys that you are familiar with if you've been following this program for a handful of years, like Bruce Thornton, like Devin Royal. But when you have guys that are able to contribute with starting experience, like Ojianwuna, that is exciting. It's not a guy that might come into the starting lineup right away. The only time you might see him in the starting lineup is in these spot moments where he starts alongside Tilly. But that's a guy who has starting experience that's coming off the bench. And I know that you've talked about this before, Andy, that when you've had conversations with Coach Diebler, it is about having experience. It is about having guys that have seen the floor in big-time moments, in big-time games. And while you would like to hope that a guy can come along and come into the program like John Mobley Jr. did this past season and contribute, it's a lot to ask for a freshman in a sport that is seeing its most experienced teams making deep runs in the tournament. So I think Ohio State adding a player like Ojianwuna that does have that experience and the statistics and the production to boot is definitely something that they have to be excited about.
Absolutely. And, we know it's a big year too coming in for Jake. I think they've started to, again, accumulate a pretty good portal haul. It's about finishing it off the right way. And that's kind of moving forward, like where things are at. So excited to see what it looks like for Josh Ojianwuna. I think, again, priority number one is going to be getting him back healthy after a season-ending knee injury this past season. But we'll see what it looks like here this winter. Again, a big season coming up for Jake Diebler and his basketball program. And as they're starting to round out this portal haul, we'll be here to cover it all on 11 Warriors. For Chase Brown, I'm Andy Anders. This has been Press Coverage.